We had another comment about kind of like foreshadow what you're going to talk about, so that people can kind of gauge.
Yeah.
And so here's our attempt to do that. So this kind of episode is going to be about, we're going to cover all the 4 political phases of the New World Order. And so we have phase 1, which will be monarchies, and they used revolutions to destroy the monarchies. Phase 2 is the nation states, where they use wars to destroy the nation states. Phase 3 is the corporate state, where they're going to consolidate the world's wealth, and we have a really good quote from a New York Times article with Cecil Rhodes. That's what he wanted to do. And then phase 4, the global state, this is consolidation of all the nation states, all the corporate states, all the global wealth into the hands of an international unelected body that governs the entire world under what is known as a world cosmocracy, or control over the entire world. And so that's a foreshadowing of what it is that we want to cover.
The podcast is going to be about, right?
Yeah. And then platforms that we're on, we get a lot of messaging around, hey, you guys over here, you guys over there. So here's the list of platforms that we're currently on: YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Rumble, Parler, Truth Social, Getter, Telegram, Twitter, TikTok, Odyssey, Patreon, BitChute. And so all of that is codified in our link tree, who.be/iconic.
Yeah. Or at least most of it. I don't know if they allow to do like a lot of it, but most of the main ones would be there. And every time something new pops out, I just go ahead and create an account just in case, and then so we can be everywhere.
And so another idea is that we should probably slow down a little bit on some of this information. For us, it's kind of like we want to get it out there machine gun fashion.
You got to keep in mind for it's been at least a year almost, or 8 months to a year. And all that information we're still been collecting, and everything has been in the background. Nothing really stopped. Yeah. And here's the outlet, and then we just want to just throw all the information, make sure everything is out. But yeah, we realize we have to slow it down.
Yeah, it has to be digestible to the audience, right? Otherwise, it just kind of gets lost in the shuffle.
Yeah, so the good thing about the documentary was we had the ability to show, we switched to the podcast because we can bring the information faster, but because we had that backlog now, there's a lot more coming out, If something new comes out or we forgot to add in the previous podcast, we can mention that in the next one. That's the good thing about the podcast.
Come back to it and hit it again. With that being said, you can support us at theiconiclabel.com. This is the house cleaning section. So hoodies and hats and t-shirts at the Iconic Label. You notice we're not in the hoodies today. Yeah. It's too hot in the studio, so we went with the Cyvilan t-shirts. Yeah. And you can also support us on Patreon, so patreon.com. And so with that being said, let's go ahead and get into it, right? Yeah. So what is this New World Order concept? And so the New World Order is really the Old World Order 2.0. And so, what was that? What was the Old World Order? Well, the Old World Order is what we would loosely term the Dark Ages. That's a period of European history from about 500 to 1500 AD. And so if you look at the Dark Ages, it was characterized by multiple feudalistic monarchies, kings, queens, emperors, under a feudalistic system. And on the bottom, this peasant class of people that made up the bulk of the population that did the majority of the work on the land. And so we're going to see later on that this thing is going to come back full circle. And there's a reason why that structure initially dies off. And then there's a reason why there's a mechanism that we can identify later that will be the thing that brings us back to that same sort of system. The Old World Order is characterized by a few ideas. And so we have a bulletized list. And so multiple feudalistic monarchies, you have kings, queens, or emperors. Multiple countries or kingdoms with closed borders. Closed borders is a very important piece, especially back in the day, because you fought and you spilled a lot of blood over these territories. Each with their independent standing armies to protect their territories, each with their own currencies like the silver pennies that were these thin coins. Each of them they had established a system of justice. And if we just fly through this list here, they had their own taxes, they were sovereign, they were patriarchal, more kings than queens, that type of thing. They had their own laws, or rather decrees, and then you have a state religion. So if it's 500 to 1500, then it's predominantly Roman Catholic. Clearly defined male and female roles and responsibilities, traditionally clearly defined roles within society. So you had the king, you had the nobility, you had the lords, you had the professional soldiers, and you had the peasants. And so it seems now that there's something that happens that makes this thing go away.
Yeah.
And so
on all those levels that you just mentioned, right? Yeah.
Yeah. And so we're going to get to that, which we're going to call the Great Consolidation. And so if that was the old world system, and that's kind of like that, those are the characteristics of it, then the New World Order would be characterized by a world government. Or a global government of unelected governing bodies, right? So, or open borders, because everyone will be considered a world citizen. Then you'll have a world army. NATO is the standing army to enforce UN policy. These peacekeepers, as they're always called, and then as you see under their authority, there's not that much peace being legislated. And so then you have a world court based on international law or admiralty law or the law of water. And we mentioned previously, I think, that Jordan Maxwell, he does a good job covering that. You have a world constitution, or perhaps based on Humanist Manifesto 1 or 2. You have a cashless society or credit-based currency system, fiat coin and paper currency. No longer accepted, gonzo, all right? And so
so if cash was king, we can see that just like the feudalism is gone and then the kingdoms are gone, now the cash will also be gone.
So every single piece, and this is going to go into the Great Consolidation piece, every single piece of that old system needed to be uprooted. But we're going to see that we're going to come full circle in just a few minutes. And so the next piece is top-down surveillance. So we'll have the 5 eyes, the 7 eyes, the 9 eyes, and the 14 eyes alliances. And these are intelligence agreements, the U.S., UK agreements that share intelligence services between all of these nations. The whole idea of like boots on the ground is being replaced with technology. And so when Klaus Schwab mentions the 4th technological revolution, or the 4th industrial revolution, the idea that a wholesale across the board, everything is being revolutionized by technology. It's really AI, algorithms, robots, those type of things. And so it's going to affect the intelligence world as well, because when you have these agreements that go back to the 60s, right? So you get all of this technology exposed under, after 9/11. You get this idea of like we're moving from this this total surveillance idea, and if we bring up the idea of like track and trace and things like that, the technology was already in place prior to the first sort of events that were to just bring in the legislation, bring in the law aspect of it. And so once those things are already in place, the technology will always be light years ahead from where the legislation currently stands. And so you need some type of an event to catch everything up, because you have other things that you're trying to do that involve this historic plan. And so as we continue to go through here, so you get, a microchip population, and people are very familiar with the concept of, the populations being microchipped. And so one of the new things is the transdermal microdot. That's the new one from Microsoft. So you get non-traditional male and female roles and responsibilities. You get non-traditional family units, like BLM has said they want to break apart the nuclear family, father, mother, child. Those ideas have to go. The next piece is selective breeding. And so humans will be birthed into the world to fulfill specific roles that are predefined by the state. And so this idea of you being able to bring another human being, you'll be penalized or imprisoned for going against the law, right? And this is it goes under this idea that, the earth is like a giant ship and it can only take so many passengers with it. And so if you're the one that's contributing to the quote unquote overpopulation of the capacity of the planet to produce the resources that we need to sustain ourselves, then you become
liable.
You're not only liable, you're producing more useless eaters, because the ones that we need for the society to function, those are the authorized births. Those that aren't, those need to go, or you need to go, because you're the one that's causing the problem. And
is it going to be the 3-strike rule or something?
so we'll see, right? And so the next piece of it is like a 2-tier caste system. So you had elites and you had the serfs, and you had some structure in between. But the idea was that the nobility, or what we're going to get into later with oligarchical collectivism, those type of things amongst the kings, the queens, and the emperors was predominant as well.
Yeah, and the funny thing is, kind of we're moving towards that era where there will be serfs and the servants and the elite class. But they're doing it through this whole, socialism, communism. Hey, we all have to get together, then we can do, like, why you're working for a company that doesn't value you, you have to unite and do all this stuff. And then as
workers of the world unite through all your capitalistic change.
As an employee, it's just like when Bezmenov said, you think it's being done for you.
It's not,
but at the end, you're going to realize real fast that you were building somebody else's world for somebody else. Yeah.
Exactly. That's the actual goal. So you get everybody on your side because you like these ideas of community. And so, socialism was supposed to be the vehicle to get us to the communistic state. And so in joining everything in community, you go, look how great this is. We don't need a police power to come in because we all recognize how great the sharing of the environment, the sharing of resources, we can see how good that is. And the state itself will now dissolve. You'll no longer need this enforcement arm. You no longer need this body to kind of like regulate anything. People will self-regulate, and that kind of ties into a lot of the mystery religion stuff because they want to produce an enlightened society. Yeah. And so a part of that enlightened society will be a lot of this stuff that you find crumbs in when you read like socialistic writings or communistic writings. And so as we continue to stay on task here, we write, I think we're going to see that somebody liked how it was during, the Dark Ages, and they want to do their best to make that a global reality. So they're trying hard to get it back. In the meantime, we go through this transition phase, and we'll use they're going to use population as a weapon to do this, right? So population or depopulation is a huge piece of this because, as we see, there's going to be a mechanism that causes the population not only to rise up or increase in number, but to become educated and rival those that were currently in power, rival their power. And so if we continue the story here, so sandwiched between this old world order concept and this new world order concept is basically where we are today. And so now we have this, what's known, as we mentioned before, is this great transition. So we're going to go from independent sovereign nations to a single world body, globally governed via two unelected bodies. And so secular power is going to be in the UN, and on behalf of that, the other side of that is the religious power, the Vatican. This is why there's the two keys on there, one for secular power, the other one is for spiritual power.
Yeah, spiritual power.
And so the next piece of this will be we're going to go from closed borders marked by national boundary lines to an open border policy. All nations will lose their sovereign boundary lines. They're already doing this like within states, that your borders and boundaries between states will mean no more than like the county lines kind of do today. So if you're in Los Angeles, what's the difference between San Bernardino County versus LA County versus Orange County? And so if that's the type of dissolving that's being done, and we find that rhetoric, we'll find it in the Agenda 21 documents, right? So as we go through that way later in what we have prepared, you'll see that that's the actual goal. They're going to set up regions that specifically the goal of those are to blur all of these lines. And then, it's kind of like going back to Zygmunt Brzezinski's the Grand Chessboard. You take these guys who, if you need a nation state here, you'll make one. If you don't, then you'll dissolve it. But if you need some conflict in the middle, then you take two warring factions, two warring family or tribes, and you pit them around natural resources and let them argue and bicker. And when they get to start fighting, that's when you come in as a peacekeeper. But they didn't know that behind the scenes you drew it up that way because you want to come in eventually and get those resources, and you want to partner with them to do it so they don't know that they're being exploited. They think of you as a peacekeeper.
Yeah.
We're going to get that peacekeeping term, that peacekeeping idea. It's going to constantly pop up on the scene.
Yeah, I mean, you know this. I don't know how many other people know. I've told you about war in Armenia too, about 2 years ago. So you have Azerbaijan attacking Armenia over some land that they've been going back and forth for a couple, at least 30 years. This is the second war, and so war goes on for 44 days. We have Turkey, the NATO, the good guys, also helping out the the Azerbaijan who's attacking Armenia and all that stuff. And here's Armenia crying for help, right? If you don't know, I'm Armenian. And Russia comes in finally after 44 days. They come in, the tanks move in, and then we go into the normalization state.
There you go.
And they come in as what? As a peacekeeper.
Yes.
So they take a nice area where where kind of in between two nations that are warring, and where the $28 billion pipeline was going to go through Azerbaijan, through Armenia, to Turkey to supply some natural gas and resources to Europe, right?
And that has its own history, why they're doing that.
Yeah, so now we've seen Russia do it. Now we're going to see probably something like that's going on right now. We can't even say it. It's crazy because we already, one of the videos we uploaded, just because we named the country, all of a sudden it's Ukraine.
Because it's us. We upload the video and then it's like giving us a warning.
Yeah, so we had to cut it out or whatever. We manual review and everything. So we'll probably see something like that too. Now, like you said, you have two warring countries, and then somebody has to step in as a peacekeeper, right? The worse it gets, the more outcry for the peace comes out, and then everybody wants to unite and just let's coexist, guys.
So that kind of gets us onto the next piece here. So you get this idea of sovereignty is going to go out the door for the nation states, and then from national armaments and weapons to protect each country. Well, there's already talks about doing this. Take the weapons of war out of the hands of the nation states, because they're kind of like spoiled children. They don't know how to behave, and they keep fighting amongst themselves, and they're causing all of these unnecessary casualties. And so what we need to do is we need to take these weapons of war and we'll put them under the authority of like the United Nations or some world governing body. And so
somebody we can trust.
Kind of like how they did with the Federal Reserve. That it's not neither federal nor does it have any reserves. But the whole idea was to stop the ebb and flow of the market, right? So
it's as federal as Federal Express, right?
There you go. Yeah. And so the next piece is from national currencies to a cashless social credit system. And so, again, I think we've reiterated this a couple times, but our financial scoring system was, built upon by the Chinese to get their social credit score system. And so that's going to be all of that is going to end up being is the gamification of society, to where you don't really have these things that were called natural rights anymore. They'll be called natural rights, but they're really going to be privileges, kind of like driving in California. Driving is a privilege, but it's not a right.
Yeah, and if we go with the theme of like corporation and companies and all that stuff, we know that they have policies, right? So then there's no real, it's not a law, it's a policy.
Right.
If you don't obey by it. So we've saw the past 2 years where we can legally enforce this, but this is a mandate. Like, okay, what does that mean? Do I have to do this? Do I not have to do this?
Exactly.
Because if you're saying I have to do this, there's some rights you're infringing on. That's why you're not saying that it's a law, but then somehow you're still pushing it. So
somehow we all have to abide by it.
Yeah,
right?
but we already see how blurred the lines are, right, between the mandates, the laws, what it goes over, what it can't.
And if you're a civilian, you're one of those people walking around without obeying the mandates, without wearing the face coverings and things like that, then you get vilified by those that are either perpetuating the psyop or those that are fooled by it. So the next piece on here, we're going from national constitutions to international law of universal privileges based on a social credit score. And then we go from this quasi-religious freedom idea to this idea of universal nature worship based on pantheism. And so we'll get into later to why they use pantheism. It satisfies both the secular and the sacred accounts. And so people that, if nature is like this universal thing that kind of glues everybody together, if you call nature God, then you have some people that on the religious side will be like, this is God's creation, we should take care of it. If you're a secularist, like, this is my environment, I want to take care of it. Yeah. And so when you get the consolidation of the religions later under this idea of pantheism, we're going to see the end results of that when we get to the section that talks about why they want to unify the world's religions and what's really behind all of that stuff.
Bringing back the blue laws or whatever, right? That's what it was called, blue laws.
So in the United States, so just like I guess a heads up, the lockdowns that we saw under the pandemic will then kind of shift over to, as our CNN correspondent would say, where the next thing for us is climate change, and then that's going
to hit climate change fast, whatever.
The next thing after that is Sunday law, right? And so that will be implemented globally. Now you can get this idea of look how much the Earth recovered under this idea that everybody was resting. They didn't call it that because everybody was under mandatory lockdown. And so you get a cleaner environment. Look at the air. The air it's fresher. It's easier to breathe. You get all these. If you look at the maps of like air quality, it's green everywhere, right? And so under that idea, well, if we all just took one day off
out of the week, right?
Out of the week to let the environment rest. You're appeasing both parties at that time. So,
and since you Christian folks like that Sunday thing, you don't want to work, you want to go and all that stuff. How about we take that day?
Right. So Sunday is not the Sabbath, but they're going to use Sunday as that international day of rest. And so the secular people will be like, yeah, I'll take a day off for the environment. Why not? Give me 3 days off if it's if it's necessary, right? So, and then you get this idea of non-traditional family structure. So no more this idea of a father, mother, child. It can be two fathers, two mothers, and whatever mixture is allowable. And so the next piece is selective breeding for determined roles within the world state. And so here's where we finally get to what's known as the Great Consolidation, or at least what we term the Great Consolidation. And so they're going to consolidate all national constitutions under a UN charter. We already see this type of thing happening. You get all these parallel organizations, NGOs, CSOs, that are set up to do the primary functions and roles of administrations.
Yeah, they start as advisory companies, right? We'll just come here and make sure that you're doing the right thing.
We just want to advise you on policy. And so most of your policy actually comes from these characters, and we'll get into, I think midway through is kind of like all the roundtable group influence on all the governments of the world, how they do it, and we kind of get the nitty gritty behind in the details, the inner workings of the roundtable groups when Cecil Rhodes was still here, and then shortly after he passes away, who takes over from there, and what the actual ideas were. And so the next piece is consolidate all the wealth through corporations. And so you have this idea that they want to bankrupt the nations. We saw this before with Cost Plus, with the war, the war on terror is what they called it. But the war in Iraq, the war in Afghanistan. And so Cost Plus was you would get if you're a company that's going over there to participate, you're Khaki, Blackwater, Keller, Brown, and Root. You're going over there to provide security or put in roads and electrical wires or just
democracy. Make sure that
so the military is doing the democracy part. Yeah. you're a supplemental.
The companies that are supporting. That's right. Yeah, yes. I'm thinking of the military.
You're laying the roads for the people need to get to KFC and they need to get to Starbucks, right? So. So you get this idea that under Cost Plus, you got a percentage of the total amount of money that you wasted, right? So you had, laundry, and a bag of laundry was costing $99 per bag. A 6-pack can of soda, a 6-pack of soda was $45. Yeah. And so you get these exorbitant costs. The one that we saw was the SUV that they paid the total lease was $250,000 for a $40,000 vehicle.
Yeah, most of it is, we go a little bit deeper in Communist Subversion 1 in all those, right?
Yeah.
So that one is still on YouTube, so you can watch that.
Yeah, they haven't stricken.
Yeah, it's like imagine you're trying to teach your kid about business. Hey, you can open this lemonade stand. Here's $10. If you spend all that, I'll give you $12.
Makes no sense.
To cover whatever you spend, and then $2 would be your profit.
Yeah, so however much money you waste, I'm gonna give you that as a percentage of profit. Plus, I'm gonna cover your base cost of the contract for going out there. So there's this upfront. This is what we're willing to pay for you even going on this campaign.
Yeah. So for whoever has the lemonade business, that's really good. But whoever is going to pay, that's not going to last too long.
And so this was part of the Robert Wells from the John Birch Society. He gives those 10-point strategies for how you would systematically go through and do something like this. You need to get rid of the currency of the United States as wastefully as possible. And we start seeing that you get these ideas like in the last year or 2 years we borrowed more money than historically we've ever printed.
Yeah, I think it's like over 30% of the printed amount was in the past 2 years, over $10 trillion.
And where is it?
I'm sure he's doing something good in the world, Jeremy. I wouldn't question it.
So we can get into that stuff later because, if there's this whole idea, follow the money, you find the perpetrators, right? But what is the next piece here? So for sure, they're consolidating the wealth, and you're getting these CSOs and NGOs kind of taking over the functions of government, but in the international space.
And also we see it with like BlackRock, Vanguard, and all that stuff too. Majority of these big companies are owned in major shares to them, to the point where now you have somebody like Elon Musk would come in, buy a majority selling shares in Twitter, and then Vanguard would go out of their way to buy more just to have that control.
And it's not even valued that much.
Yeah. So
what
like
they're trying to pay.
Yeah, exactly. Like you said, if you follow the money, if all it is about these are business people, they're just trying to make some money. You're like, okay, here's a company that's not worth 50 billion or 40 something billion,
right.
but you're being offered that. A smart business decision would be sell it, right?
Yeah,
make your shareholders happy.
This thing has reached its fruition.
Exactly.
It's time for the exit strategy to kick in.
Yeah.
Let's sell this thing and all walk away.
But we see it has nothing to do with it, and all it is the control that they want, right? Twitter has become this big when it comes to like, because the idea was, at least what Elon Musk says he was going to do, turn it into public square, whereas like freedom of the speech would be kind of like the main thing that they would focus going forward, right?
Yeah.
But we see there are companies that are not so happy with that idea to the point where they're willing to lose a lot of money.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not. So for that type of stuff, for me, I would. There's speculation, but I would say that none of these guys are about what they're trying to do, right? So this is like smoke and mirrors. This is the theater where all of this stuff plays out. None of it is about any of that stuff, right? So big tech is not these guys that people
we
would know
mentioned
about.
some big tech on the communist version too, right?
Yeah, that's communist version. So we go through all the different programs and these are old programs that who knows what they are today unless you're working at the NRO, and the NRO is a National Reconnaissance Office, and so that's big tech, NRO, NSA, those guys, and then so to play around on what looks like a big stage for us, because that's a lot of money. It seems like that's a big deal, but it's not. It's nowhere on the. When we look at technology, especially military technology, and I think we mentioned previously, or maybe not. We mentioned MITRE Corp, DARPA, the Jason Group. Those these are guys that we'll get into later, because in terms of like the coming to the pinnacle of the military-industrial complex, when you start looking like Vanguard, BlackRock, and those guys managing portfolios that are in upwards of the 10 trillion mark, that's greater than most of the GDP of most nations. And when you do that, then you have to look at their portfolio and see, well, that's going to kind of give you a good idea about where things can go. This whole idea of like the military-industrial complex has not gone away. It won't go away, and it's a big key factor in what the roundtable groups wanted to get actual control over, because military armaments, and that's a huge business, and you get this idea of guns, oil, and drugs. That's the and some people would say that's the in the God that they trust, right? So, but these are mega industries, and when you have companies of this magnitude being managed, their assets being managed by just a handful of companies, you can start seeing like they start basically throwing their weight around, and when they do that, who can do anything against it? And so nation states have these natural limitations, but corporate states or corporations can easily kind of like do their own thing, as long as they play by the nation state rules for a time, while they're systematically gutting the nation states of their wealth, of their sovereignty, and their standing in the world. And so we see the World Economic Forum has already said the United Nations, or actually the United States, will no longer be a superpower by 2030. And well, how can they make a declaration like that? I mean, if when we get into that stuff, it'll be clear to see, because you're wasting all of this money for the nation state, and you're kind of basically handcuffing the nation state through debt. And then once that's done, it's just a couple crises away from getting your way, essentially. But let's stay on task here, because we kind of hopped off. The next piece of it will be they're going to consolidate the currency. So as we said, say goodbye to the coin and paper. You're going to go one world digitized currency. That we have some articles where they're removing ATMs from all over the world, and as people try to go pull their money out, this will be a major problem, especially like not only has the United States borrowed so much money till your purchasing power drops, And if you keep it in the bank and if it's considered cash, then there's this problem that you're losing money over time.
Yeah, but the inflation, you're losing money by just holding cash, right?
By just holding on to it. And so, but, imagine if not only that, but you have your access to it, your ability to go and actually pull it out to use it in the economy.
So we saw that with 150 million Russians, that when Visa decided that you no longer have access to your money, you don't.
That's the corporate state talking there.
So, and then right before that, when GoDaddy decided that the Canadian truckers don't get their money, the $9 million or $10 million, we saw it then too. And then people that were donating even to that, their accounts being frozen, and then the whole, So we're seeing it now, whereas before, these things would sound like, oh, you're just crazy. Who's gonna do that? Nobody would do it. They won't let them. They had there's laws, there's rights.
Yeah, you get all that pushback.
Yeah.
So, but let's go to the next one. So, consolidate energy resources now under climate change law. So, Agenda 21, Agenda 2030, Agenda 2050.
The whole Green New Deal and all that stuff.
So, Green New Deal, the Paris Accord, COP26, sustainable development, right? So, with those, they want to go down to the city levels, and they want to create these regions for which there will be overlapping regions for different cities. And so the question will become, well, if it's this city, then it's this person or this elected body or officials. If it's that city, it's the. But if you're setting up something that's kind of going to
area, right?
So it's a area, subgroups, regions, and what that's going to do is give them the ability to kind of transverse all of those different areas, but not with elected officials.
Yeah. So an elite group will choose somebody to put there, right?
And so now this kind of gets us into like one of the forms of government, technocracy, where through your ability, your tools, you can kind of do things that you don't need a human being there for. So you would just need like a technical expert to provide some type of data, and that data would be scientific with some peer-reviewed publications associated with it. It'll be very convincing, and then people that were unelected officials, those guys will rise up as kind of like leaders, but they're unelected, so you have no say-so in what things they actually do. But now they become the trusted source, and the elected officials, they kind of like fall off to the side.
And again, hate to bring back COVID again, but we saw that often, like when it came to that too, right? So you had somebody unelected making a decision, and I'm not even saying Fauci. Even before that, when we saw from Germany, right? We have this whole COVID episode. We never released it too, right?
Christian Dresden.
Dresden comes out with their synthetic version, and then all of a sudden everybody gets in line and then starts following that.
The next piece of it consolidation of all. We spoke about this a little bit earlier. Consolidation of all biological, chemical, and nuclear weapon arsenals out of the hands of the nation states and into the hands of the unelected global governing bodies. And so obviously the candidate for that is the United Nations. And I think we included in Communist Subversion 2, there was this idea of like world government will only be the thing that can solve all of these conflicts between nation states, right? So you get this idea that nation states are irresponsible, that they, you get this in patriarch, like this idea of like, having all this like nationalism or nationalistic ideas. These things are going to kind of be demonized. We kind of already see that now, but we mentioned this in Communist Subversion 2, where the idea of raising children to be patriotic, raising the children to have this national fervor, these things they'll be demonized, right? And so today we're already seeing the beginnings of those things. It's going to continue to increase, because nationalities or nation states are the hindrance to global government, because you have to get the sovereignty out of the way. So remember the quote from Arnold Toynbee, who says, we're trying to wrest this mysterious political force called sovereignty out of the hands, out of the clutches of the nation states. And so while we're denying with our lips, what we're doing with our hands. And we have a bunch of good quotes that are that both made it into Communist Subversion 2, but we'll get into later. And so the last piece of this will be like, the consolidation of law, with national constitutions being dissolved into international law. So this will be the International Admiralty Law, or the law of water. And again, Jordan Maxwell is good on that. All courts will be under the jurisdiction of the International Court of Justice.
A world court, right?
A world court, military tribunals, yes. And so we get this idea again that sandwiched between the old world order and the new world order is the story of how it is all happening. And so there are two transitory ideas that help make the transition possible, and those conditions are to bring about two things: the nation states. And so the nation states, either you can define them as either constitutional republics, monarchies, or democracies, or the corporate states, which are powerful corporations or groups of corporations that control constitutional republics, monarchies, or democracies. And so where are we at currently? Well, we're in the nation state phase that's moving into the corporate state phase that is going to give rise to the global state phase. And so if we do a quick overview, there's some entity behind the scenes that wanted us to go from monarchies, something rivaled the monarchies, rivaled their power at that time back in the 5 to 1500s. And they got rid of them by using revolutions, and then they gave rise to some people would see that rise as like a natural occurrence from like the French Revolution, the American Revolution, things like that. But we'll see that there's as the Masons have the hidden hand that's behind the scenes, right? So somebody's moving these concepts forward. So we're going to go from monarchies over to nation states to the corporate state to the global state. Understanding this piece will kind of give us a good springboard to understanding the entire New World Order narrative. And so we can start with monarchies.
Yeah.
And so we asked the question, well, what is a monarchy? So a monarchy is a form of government in which a single person is the head of state for the entirety of their life, or until they're basically they die or abdicate the throne. In most monarchies, you would have the three powers of government. The executive, legislative, and judicial powers, they're all reside in one office. This guy's judge, jury, and executioner. And so in that office is the office of the king, the office of the queen, or the office of the emperor. And so today we have a few constitutional monarchies that are left. We have the United Kingdom, they have a queen. Belgium has a king. Norway has a king. Japan has an emperor, and Thailand also has a king. And so we go, okay, if we're going from monarchies over to nation states, what is this nation state thing? We kind of have I think everybody has an idea what the nation states are, but it turns out that they're pretty difficult to define. So you have three different theories on how to define them. So it is important to note that there's no real agreed upon definition of nation states, but there are three competing theories. And so the first theory is what's known as the declarative theory of statehood. A state is a state if it fits the following criteria. It has to have, a defined territory. I mean, at least you got to have that. A permanent population. Your people can't be coming and going, right? So you can't have nomads that are wandering the land. It has to have some type of government, some type of government in place, and the capacity to enter relations with other states. It's okay. That's it's
self-explanatory.
Yeah, so pretty straightforward. And so you get this idea: a state doesn't have to be recognized by other states for it to be a state. And so then you get the constitutive theory of statehood. It says, a state is a state if it's recognized as sovereign by other states. Okay, that makes there's cases of that, right? So and then you have the Westphalian system, based on the Treaty of Westphalia, 1648, where they say a state is an entity that has sovereignty over its territory and its domestic affairs to the exclusion of everyone else. No external powers based on this principle of what they call non-interference. I'm over here, I'm doing my thing with my affairs in this land. These are my borders and boundaries.
You leave me alone.
Leave me alone, right? And I'll leave you alone, that type of thing, right? So. And so you go, the nation state has become the standard ideal in France during the French Revolution, and quickly the nationalist idea spread throughout Europe and later the rest of the world. And so a standard definition now that we'll hear is like a nation state is a political entity that has, that's the state part, that governs a cultural entity, like so that's the nationalistic part. And so by serving its citizens, people that are living in a territory with a common culture organize a government or a ruler or an army conquers the territory and imposes its own will upon the people, conquering the people, and they set up some type of government with civic rules for the society. And so you go, okay, now we have very loose definitions for monarchies, going to nation states. So what is this corporate state idea? So a corporate state is a term used to refer to an economic, political, or judicial system controlled by corporations or a group of corporations. So corporations form the basics or the basis of a society within the state. So corporations can buy armies, much like the nobles did in the feudalistic times. The nobles were providing the king or the queen or the emperor with their standing army. And so as well as they finance political campaigns. And so people kind of frown upon this idea of special interest money. Hey, I'm going to run for this particular office. You can give me a couple bucks, and once I get into office, I'll pass some.
I'll take care of you.
Yeah, I'll take care of you. I'll pass
you
some.
You scratch my back, I scratch yours. Yeah.
Exactly, right? So in order to control these politicians to subvert state policy, so the corporation is going to band together, or a single corporation will band, and it will provide money to a specific campaign. And then the politician is basically in the palm of their hand going forward. And so many worry about, a corporatocracy or oligarchy is replacing, or soon will replace this idea of democracy. And then we're getting, it's interesting because here we've never had a democracy. We have a democratic republic, yeah. Right? So really we've had a constitutional republic. And so this idea that we're going to bring democracy to the world, something that we ourselves don't have, it gets into some comical conversation. So, but corporations combined with NGOs will destroy the nation state. This is basically the idea, because corporations, again, they don't have the limitations that the nation states have. They can be they're transboundary in nature, and so products, goods, and services can go over different regions. People want their products in their own currency and their own language, right? So.
And kind of just to jump ahead, just to give a little bit more preview, it's unique to have the nation states because you're going to tie a lot of rights of people from that nation state to that. And then you need the nation states gone, because once that nation state is gone, the rights that you give to the people that were at that in the nation also gone.
The big print giveth, the small print taketh away, right? So... And it's exactly that. They're going to use this whole idea of giving. So they codify your rights and they tie it to a nation state. Mm-hmm. And your quote unquote natural rights are going to be based on whatever nation that you're in. And when the nations get dissolved, so too do these so-called national rights that are based on that national sovereignty of whatever nation it was.
Yeah, that's kind of like the big idea of that, right? Otherwise, you might sit and think, who would see through the hassle of like planning something like that? They don't just want to. They're not just playing a game of Jenga or something, building something, and then until it falls, and then let's start again.
Yeah. And so the next piece here is so when corporations come together, pooling their resources to control economic, political, and judicial systems, this is called oligarchical collectivism. So, that's, kind of a mouthful. So what is an oligarch? An oligarch is a person who is part of a small group holding power in a state. And so the power can be in the form of nobility, fame, education, corporate, religious, political, or military control. Okay, that's a good working definition. What is collectivism? Collectivism is this idea of you're giving the group priority over each individual. And so when applied to a corporatocracy or the corporate state, you get this idea of a few wealthy corporations then control the political, economic, and judicial systems of that state for the benefit of a small group of corporations, and then behind that, a small group of shareholders, right? So with those things being said, so we have monarchies, we have nation states, we have the corporate state out of the way. So what is this global state idea? Well, a global state is a single political authority for all humanity, right? It generally entails some form of government through a single state with jurisdiction over the entire world, the entire political, economic, and judicial system of the world, usually called, and we have a couple of definitions here, one world government or global government, one worldism, or more recently, cosmocracy, rulership of the world. So now that the definitions are all sorted out, how does all this stuff work, right? So this is it's a nice little brush up on the history of it, but how does it work? And so we mentioned that monarchies give rise to the nation states. The nation states then give rise to the corporate state. The corporate state then gives rise to the global state. And so, that's a nice little string to put together, but what is this mechanism of transformation? And so we have monarchies are destroyed by revolutions, giving rise to the nation states. Nation states are then going to be weakened by war, and historically have been already, and they give rise to the legal structure of the global state under the United Nations. Oligarchic super corporations absorb the wealth of the nations, creating a corporate superstate that's able to surpass the limitations of all the different nation states. And then the corporate state then develops the infrastructure for the global state, the United Nations, whose legal infrastructure was birthed by weakening each of the nations. And so the global state then is the United Nations infrastructure with NATO, UNESCO, and all of its list of organizations that take over all the roles, responsibilities, and functions of a nation state. And so this gets us into how did they actually get rid of these monarchies? Because it's the production is what is birthed out of this idea of getting rid of the monarchies that is going to be used again. If it ain't broke, then why fix it? That's going to get us back into this feudalistic fashion. So if the monarchies were really represented by this feudalistic idea, then something is going to get us back there. So something got us out, something's going to get us back in. And so let's go ahead and go through it here. So since monarchies represent, the old world order under feudalism, we'll start with them. We have to understand how monarchies fell. How did nation states take over for a short time? How the corporate state then dissolves the wealth of the nations while, instituting this technological infrastructure or the basis for the global state. And then how the global state is nothing more than the same powers that gave you this old world order system. So earlier you said these guys think generations ahead. They're thinking decades ahead. They're thinking almost millennia ahead, right? So, and so we asked the question, well, how did the monarchies then get dissolved? And so it's a simple answer, through revolutions. And so the next question, obviously, is, well, which revolutions are you referring to? Well, the Industrial Revolution plays this huge role, but, something that was a little bit more planned out were the American and the French Revolution. So the Industrial Revolution from 1760 to 1840, you get the rise of the middle class. The American Revolution, 1765 to 1791, you get the rise of the second beast, if it's God, King, Father, Friend parlance, right? The French Revolution, 1789 to 1799, you get the death blow to feudalism. The first revolution was the Industrial Revolution, and you had the Agricultural Revolution. That was another huge piece. But why was the Industrial Revolution so important to this whole New World Order concept? Well, because it created the wealth for the lower class of people, resulting in the middle class. And so we go from, hand production methods to, machines, new chemical manufacturing and iron production processes. We get the increase in the use of steam and water power, the development of machine tools, mechanized factory systems. And so you get this quantum leap in all these different industries.
Now all of a sudden you can do stuff cheaper, faster, more efficient, and a bigger scale, right?
Yeah. And so it's going to provide wealth for a group of people that never has had this type of wealth before.
And if we kind of, again, to jump ahead a little bit, to parallel, we see, like you said, with the AI and everything, we kind of have the same exact things. We can do things on a faster, more efficient, without the kind of the overhead of a human being there too, right?
The human being worker is going to be phased out. And if that's the case, then so goes his wealth. Yeah. So goes his contribution to those things which made him in the first place. And so, what is his only recourse is to go back to the same position that he was before the technological revolution.
Peasant.
Took place in the first place. So we get this explosion in textile, ironwork, steam power, assembly lines, new chemicals, cement production, gas-powered lighting systems, glass making, paper machines, agricultural machinery, mining machinery, transportation industry goes exponentially during this time. And so, what does that have to do with the social political landscape then? Well, it doesn't, everything, right? So it creates the powerful, wealthy, educated middle class. And so the people now want to participate in politics. I want to participate in my political future. And so they don't like this idea of the divine right of kings to rule that these monarchies are holding on to, that basically puts a political ceiling on the middle class. And so why an industrial revolution first? Well, we get, you create and empower a middle class of citizens that you turn peasants into merchants. Being wealthier meant that they can now pay for educating themselves and then their children, their offspring. And then what are they going to do? So as they gain more wealth and knowledge, they eat better, they live longer, they have access to better medical treatment, and they can now pass down this wealth generationally. And so
exponentially we're going to see like the growth in population too, in more middle class population, more people, like you said, now having better education, living longer and wanting to participate in their political future. Yeah.
And so now you get this idea that, yes, they're making this money, they're passing this money down generationally, and as the middle class population grows, they produce more offspring more frequently. They outnumber the kings, the lords, the nobles, the vassals, and the professional soldiers. And so, since there are more of them and they become wealthier, they naturally want to have this participation in their political future, and they're not going to hear this idea of like, I can't participate because of this divine right of kings to rule. Like that has to go, right? Gonzo, as we mentioned before. And so, and those things are based on, the idea was some obscure bloodline that the peasants didn't even, what does that even mean? You had
no chance to, right? Yeah.
Right. And so the divine right of kings to rule stuff we cover in the mystery religion aspect of the Cyvilan Podcast. And so you get the next idea is that they can now leverage this group, this newly created group can now leverage their wealth individually and collectively against the king, his noblemen, and his aristocracy. Yeah. And so if you guys don't want to participate with us, then we can, just like your nobles, we can hire professional soldiers. Yeah. And if you don't want to go along with us, then there's other people in other kingdoms that are also able to have access to, the Industrial Revolution, and they're becoming more wealthy too. So you're going to, the writing is now on the wall for monarchies. It's almost
so that's kind of like the early stages of oligarchy too, right? That would just oligarchical collectivism. Right, now all of a sudden you have this richer people getting together and trying to overpower or try to push their narrative to whatever they want to do.
So you think about it, it's the corporations now that are in, like Visa saying, hey, we're gonna your card no longer works in this area. We can't, and so before a nation state never had that power, and so you have this idea of like the corporations are now wielding an immense power that the nation states never had in their back pocket. And so, the kings that lasted the longest, they were smart. They partnered with this new class, in a joint venture in like business or commerce. And those that didn't.
These are the sellouts, what we would call, right? Yeah.
Today we would say, it's a sellout. So those that didn't, they perished. Yeah. And so, it's interesting because according to the Encyclopedia Britannica, this is exactly what happened, right? So a lot of the quotes that we just yank straight out of there. So one of them goes like this: the increase in numerous and prosperous elite of wealthy commoners, merchants, manufacturers, and professionals, often called the bourgeoisie, aspired to political power in those countries where they did not already possess it. These quote-unquote peasants now, many of whom owned land, had attained a couple of things: an improved standard of living, an improved education, and wanted to get rid of the last vestiges of feudalism. They don't like this stuff at all, right?
You mean to tell me I can't participate in? Nah, we don't want to hear that. Yeah.
Yep. So as to acquire the full rights of landowners and and to be free to increase their holdings. Hey, we don't want to let go of this newfound wealth. And we don't want you to put a ceiling on it either. And so, further down it says, furthermore, from about 1730, higher standards of living had reduced the mortality rate among adults considerably. So now this population is starting to grow.
Yeah, so that's the better food, better health, and all that stuff, right? Yeah.
Right, yeah. And so, what did that do? You get a population boom. And so this, as it says in the Britannica, had led to an increase in the population of Europe at an unprecedented level for centuries. It doubled between 1715 and the 1800s. For France, which with its 26 million inhabitants in 1789, was the most populated country of Europe. The problem was most acute. So a growing population
is a problem. Yeah.
There's other things that are attached to it. So they're growing, they're educated, they're wealthy, they're passing their wealth down, they're educating their children to do the exact same thing. And so, it says the problem was the most acute. So what problem are they talking about? We'll let them tell it. A large population created a greater demand for food and consumer goods. It's the food and consumer goods, guys. It's not the fact that you're going to be rivals to political power and you're going to want to participate in your political future. The land really can't sustain us, guys.
See, it's food shortages. What we're going to do about this?
It's interesting that you mentioned that, right? Because that's going to be another piece that comes up here. We had a side note that we'll skip just for, I don't know, for now. But it's a story of how, the Rothschilds gained their wealth, right? So we'll come back to it way later, because it's important way later, but not now. So then we asked the question, well then what happened? Now, these large populations of people they're more wealthy, they're more healthy, they're more educated. And
there's 26 million of them.
So this puts a strain on kings and queens to maintain stability within their kingdoms. And so this was evident in the French Revolution. According to the Britannica, here's an order in which things are claimed to have happened, in which the transformation takes place in France. And so, number one, the bourgeoisie resented its exclusion from political power and positions of honor. Right. Number two, the peasants were acutely aware of their situation, or were less willing to support this anachronistic or burdensome feudalistic system. Like, we don't like it, we're not going back to it, never again. Number three, social reform. You get these philosophies had been read more widely in France, more than anywhere else, and we'll get into what those philosophies were and are, because they're still alive and well today. Number four, French participation in the American Revolution had driven the government to the brink of bankruptcy. This is what the United States is doing today.
It's like, again, if we foreshadow and bring it back, we can see that the same exact thing is happening to America.
Right. History is repeating, but not blindly. It's being engineered this way, right? So, number five, France was the most populous country in Europe, and crop failures and much. We have this problem, right? So, guys, there's this population that's growing, and all of a sudden you get these crop failures in much of the country in 1788, coming to the top of a long period of economic difficulties. Hey, in 2008 the crash, and now all the food shortages are popping up. All of a sudden, farms are catching on fire. What's happening here? The same things that happened back then. They're the same things that are.
Putin did it back then. Putin did it this time. We want to stay monetized.
Obviously. Obviously. And so the long period of economic difficulties compounded existing relentlessness. And number six, the French monarchy, no longer seen as divinely ordained, this divine right of kings thing has to go, and was unable to adapt to the political and social pressures that were being exerted upon it. And so at this time, we have some intellectual heavyweights that are weighing in. They had laid the groundwork for revolution, and these guys are extremely important to actually what's happening behind the scenes. The French Revolution is not it's not happening in a vacuum. There's other interests that are there other than the people of France. So specifically, you look at what things that are taking root in the fertile intellectual minds in France. So according to the Encyclopedia Britannica, major reform arguments were being advanced. And you say, well, what were those? It says, the philosophies, intellectuals whose writings inspired these arguments were certainly influenced by the 17th century theorists. Which intellectual writings are you talking about? So these are the writings of René Descartes, who was a French philosopher, Benedict of Spinoza, who was a Dutch philosopher, John Locke, who was an English philosopher, and this is in the 16 and 1700s combined. So, well, that's nice, but which arguments did these guys advance? Well, they and a handful of philosophers had proposed the idea that a revolution seemed necessary to apply the ideas of Montesquieu. Who is Montesquieu? Well, he's a French judge and political philosopher who advocated for the separation of powers of government so that, no one branch would have all of this power consolidated. So he wanted three branches of government. You should have legislative, executive, and judicial. And so then you get Voltaire. Voltaire then comes in. He's a Jesuit French historian and philosopher. He has the advocacy for the freedom of speech, for the freedom of religion, and for the separation of church and state. So the next piece is going to be Rousseau. He's a Genevan philosopher, and he gives us this idea of supreme power is held by the people and their elected representatives. Get off of this divine right of kings to rule. Give the people the power to rule. The sovereignty should lie in them. And so,
so now we see checks and balances, the constitutional rights of freedom of speech, religion, all that stuff, and then the whole we the people idea, right? Yeah, the Bill of Rights and everything.
Mm-hmm. And so, just a little cheat is this idea was to temporarily give the people the power. and tie their political power to nation states, and so your rights would be given to you from the nation, the sovereign states. And if we dissolve the national sovereignty of each of these nations, then so do go your rights. They'll equally be dissolved. But don't worry, we'll have something else that we're prepared to put you into, and you'll be a world citizen once these nation states are dissolved. And so, and then this,
and you'll own nothing, but you'll be happy. Don't worry about it.
Yeah. And so again, that's not a, they're not asking you like, hey, forfeit your. No, they're telling you we're going to own everything. You'll own nothing, but you'll be happy, right? So
it's interesting that, like you said, so peasants back then, they're fighting for their right to own stuff, to be happy, right? Yeah, it's like, hey, I want to be able to own my property and all that stuff, And now we're gonna all take that away, but you'll be happier than the peasant when you got all that stuff. So don't worry about it.
So we come full circle, right? So that's a good catch, right? So of course these people saw that. Wait a minute, if you own nothing, it's going to be hard to be happy, right? Because now there's always these hoops that you have to jump through to get whatever it is that you need. But if you're the owner, it's a lot easier. Yeah. And so now,
if you own nothing, you always depend on somebody.
Right. So you have the multiple layers of dependencies, right? So this time period, this Enlightenment was the spread of the among the educated class of the societies through a whole bunch of interesting places. So these ideas are being spread in like Masonic lodges and agricultural societies and reading rooms. And so we mentioned the Enlightenment. So what was the Enlightenment? Because this is an important piece of it's the age of reason, or the Enlightenment is called the Age of Reason, which was an intellectual and philosophical movement that dominated Europe in the 17th and 18th centuries. The Enlightenment included a range of personalities and ideas that put forth philosophies and many different theoreticians that were fighting over various ideas, right? So what is the value of human happiness? What is the pursuit of knowledge based on this idea of reason? And you get all these ideals that pop out like liberty, progress, toleration, fraternity, constitutional government, and separation of church and state. That was that last one there, or the last two actually, is why they're underlined. They're very important in all of this stuff.
That's kind of beginning, right? Yeah, that's when you start tearing everything, right? It's gonna start
this is solve coagula.
Exactly. Yeah. So just like so we started with the monarchies and stuff like that too. Before that, it was the theocracies and all that stuff too, right? Maybe we'll get into those when the God, King, Father, Friend.
Yep.
So when they come, the revolutions not only put away the feudalism and all that stuff, but also the old world order, right?
Yes.
Which is the theocracy, and then still people having their moralities and everything tied to something bigger than just another man. Yeah.
Right. And so, that aspect of it. So there's a reason why the monarchies had the divine right of kings to rule it all, and so that is going to be an important piece with the mystery religions, because those ideas are I think. One of the most important pieces, because I think we mentioned before that if all this stuff is kind of like if it's a coloring book, then this is kind of like a sketch. The mystery religion stuff adds all the color to everything, right? You add the shadows and the color. The image will really pop off the screen once you add all the mystery religion stuff, because it provides the ideologies that are behind what's driving these people to do these things. When they have so much power already, when they have so much money already, why are they doing what they're doing? And that's a very interesting piece. At least we find it very interesting. Right? And so now you get all of this stuff leads to what's known as a century of revolutions. And so 1750 to 1850, you get the Industrial Revolution. 1760, you get a middle class. The American Revolution, 1776, you get a constitutional republic. French Revolution, 1789, you get the end of the monarchy in France. And as you keep going, Spanish Revolution, Polish Revolution, Italian and German revolutions. And so 1775 and 1773, you get the American Revolution. You get 13 of Great Britain's North American colonies. They threw off this rule to establish the sovereign United States in 1776. And so 1787 to 1799, you get the French Revolution that put an end to the French monarchy, feudalism, and took political power from the Catholic Church. And so that's another important piece that we need to get into a little bit later. And so the question now becomes, well, what did the French Revolution produce? Well, out of the French Revolution, you get the Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen. This is 1789, and then which produced 17 natural rights. Then later you get what's known as the Declaration of Rights of Man of the Citizen of 1793. And you ask the question, well, what were these rights that come out? And all of this stuff is going to sound really familiar as we read through them, right? So, well, in 1789, the Declaration, you get men are born and remain free and equal in rights. Hey, every man's endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, life, liberty, pursuit of happiness. That sounds familiar. Number 2, these rights are liberty, property, security, and resistance to oppression. Right. Number 3, the principle of all sovereignty resides essentially in the nation. Like, oh, we don't get
this is when they take everything away, right? Yeah, like we talked about. Yeah, the big print give it, the small print give it away. Yeah,
take it away.
Take it away. Yeah. So now you have, hey, look at you. You have all this right. You can, you have these right to secure, to have property, to secure it, to be happy, and all that stuff. But it's tied right to this nation, because then later on we can take their nation away and take those rights right away. Yeah.
Exactly. Right. So the fourth one, right? Liberty consists in the freedom to do everything which injures no one. Right. And number 5, law only prohibits such actions that are hurtful to society. And so these are, if you can go through all of them here, we'll skip down. And so we'll ask another question, why is any of this stuff significant? Well, it provided the basis for the Bill of Rights and the constitutional governments all over the world. These were not only the core values of the French Revolution, but they had major impact on popular conceptions of individual liberty, democracy in Europe and worldwide. And so, well, what did that establish? And so we look at it, it established that man has natural rights that are universal. They're valid at all times and all places, protected equally by the law. Well, what were these new natural rights based on? If we go back, number 3, the nation is essentially the source of all sovereignty, nor can there any individual or any body of men be entitled to any authority which is not expressly derived from it. That's in 1789. And so in 1793, we get another version, and it basically the same applies. And so it says, number 23, this guarantee rests upon national sovereignty. Number 25, the sovereignty resides in the people. 27, let any person who may usurp the sovereignty be instantly put to death by free men. And so you go, okay, so we've been given these new rights, and nations are being birthed all over the world on these ideas, but we've tied all these rights to the nations themselves. And so the next question is, what happens when these nations are dissolved? This gets us into the next piece. Well, when the nations are dissolved, so too will all these so-called national or natural rights. It's interesting because, the actual image that was created to represent the rights mimicked the law of Moses being handed down, right? So maybe in post-production we'll add an image of what that looks like. And so instead of Yahweh, the God of Israel, you have another God. And what that's going to represent later, as we'll come to find out, looking at some of the sources, will be Lucifer.
I think we showed in, which one was it, Communist Version 2, where we showed the image, Yeah. So, but we'll probably add it here too.
Right. And so there's a whole bunch of esoteric and exoteric stuff that's on there. And so basically, that's the two doctrine policy. There's a doctrine for, or set of beliefs for like those that are in the inner circle, and then another set or another policy for those that are on the outside. And so on this document, we'll see that, a pyramid or the all-seeing eye. We'll see the Roman fascii, the same one that we have in the U.S. House of Representatives. Yeah. And so and that one that's on there has a spearhead with a red Phrygian cap that's pointing out. And so that Phrygian hat is also known as the Jacobian hat. It's worn by Roman or emancipated slaves from Roman times. It's also known as the red cap of liberty. And so you also see what's known as the Ouroboros, or the snake that eats its own tail. What they would say on the outward or the exoteric doctrine is fertility, life, death, and rebirth, that idea, but has a completely different esoteric meaning. This brings us to phase 2, right? So we've gone through all of that, so now we've covered the monarchies, they're dying off. Well, we get these nation-state things that are based on rights. And so phase 2. So phase 2, once monarchies have been destroyed and supplanted with constitutional republics supported by the middle class under the guise of empowering the people, then you use the prevailing system, capitalism, free markets, to galvanize and consolidate the wealth of the entire world and strengthen. You don't want to strengthen every nation. You just want to strengthen a handful of nations, as they would say, the first world nations, right? So it's funny because, all the countries that have all the resources
are,
so they would say that these are poor nations. You don't go to poor nations to get rich, right? So they're not poor. They're being subjugated, right? So you get this idea that nations themselves will gradually then be converted into the corporate state because they've now galvanized all this wealth. Without the wealth, you can call yourself a state all you want.
So
it really means nothing.
We see kind of like the classism when it comes to like in the nation states, right? So you have this natural resources, but all you do is just serve us with your natural resources, right?
There you go.
We'll print some paper, we'll give it to you for it, but we want your natural resources.
Yeah, 100%. Right, yep. And so we remember we provided the working definitions for nation state and the corporate state. So the failure of democracies or democratic republics to provide or to bring about peace, they say this caused, World War I, World War II, and eventually it's going to cause World War III. And the disregard for the planet, that's a big piece because that's going to dovetail on all the climate change stuff. Will bring about the third and final phase of this, which they call this New World Order thing. Where you get a single unelected body like the Vatican, the spiritual power puppeting everything through the temporal power or political power. The United Nations will be the final world ruling power via corporations, think tanks, institutions, international agreements under what we call the Great Consolidation. And so now, if we've mentioned it a couple times now, what is the Great Consolidation? And so the Great Consolidation, again, is the term that we're using, to refer to the old world order being turned into the New World Order system, in which later becomes the New World Order 2.0. And they're going to consolidate all nation states or national constitutions under UN charters by dissolving national sovereignty. They're going to consolidate all wealth through phony crises like 119, the different bombings, and Divik 91. They're going to consolidate languages. English is the lingua franca, or the common business language of the world, just like Akkadian in the ancient times was the international language of correspondence. Then they're going to consolidate currencies. Say goodbye to coining cash currencies. And you're going to get this one world currency. Consolidate energy resources under this idea of climate change, laws that would be regulated by the United Nations. Consolidate media. I think that nothing needs to be said there. We kind of I think everybody knows that one.
We know that's never possible, so that's why we didn't put anything there.
And so there's a reason why all these mega corporations or mega media corporations or CFR, Council on Foreign Relations, corporate sponsors, and that's gonna be a huge piece because understanding the background on how the CFR became an intricate part of all the media corporations and consolidated them.
And you need something to control that position with, whether it's like if it's Fox News or CNN, to find out they're just under the same company, or
two sides of the same coin.
Yeah, for the very least, you'll have the same exact, like Vanguard or BlackRock owning majority of it. It doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter.
Yeah. So again, you can elect which one you want to watch, but you don't select it, right? They're still going to tell you what they're going to show you.
You've never elected you may have elected a president, but you've never selected one.
Yeah.
And so, and this gets us to the next piece. Consolidate the religions, climate change, earth, Gaia worship, Sunday law, the blue laws, pantheism, or all is God. We'll unpack a lot of this stuff in the mystery religion aspect because with that, we're going to go all the way back. We'll cover some Atlantean stuff or, ancient Ugarit, Sumer, the Anunnaki, the Apkallu, all that stuff in the mystery religion aspect because that's the birth of the divine right of kings stuff comes from. The next piece is the consolidation of all biological, chemical, and nuclear weapons arsenals, get them out of the hands of the nation states and into the hands of the unelected global governing bodies. You're to consolidate law with national constitutions being dissolved. International law prevails, and so the International Court of Justice will be the de facto world court. And so now we get to once everything is consolidated, Now they have control at different levels. And so Anthony Sutton, in his book America's Secret Establishment, talks about, to control and manipulate the society, you need control over different aspects of the society. And so he gives a bulletized list. He says, education, you need to control how people of the future will behave, and you do that by controlling what they know. You need to control money. This is the means of holding wealth and exchanging goods. You should have control over that as well. And then you need law, the ability to enforce the will of the state, the world law, or the world court. The next piece is politics, the direction of the state or the economy. The next would be history, what people believed happened in the past. And then the next is psychology, the means of controlling how people think right now. The next piece is medicine, the power over health, life, and death. The next piece is religion. What are people's spiritual beliefs? Where do they think the ultimate destiny lies with themselves and with humanity? The next piece is media. What people know and learn about current events. If I can keep you blind from those things, you're kind of cut off from this whole aspect. And then continuity, the power to appoint who follows in your footsteps. It doesn't no good if you just are able to do it for your lifetime. You go back to zero. But if you can continue this thing to go generation after generation after generation, now you're really wielding some power. And so now
that's Cecil Rhodes, right?
Yeah. And so, when you look at it, you go, when do we really get started with this transformation? When do we start seeing it happen? So the transformation began to take place during the First World War. And so this is, we're specifically kind of referencing the roundtable groups here because they were instrumental in all these behind the scenes type things that kind of led up to the historic ideas of what led to World War I.
Yeah, they were doing businesses in USSR and all that stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, and so that's so you get this idea that the transformation began to take place during the First World War, which was to overthrow the powers of the czars in Russia, and in turn that country into a stronghold for atheistic communism. And so there was a long-standing plan to do that. A lot of those writings are going to be traced back to Masonic sources, and that's covered in the mystery religion stuff. And so the next piece will be, Gary H. Kah in his book En Route to Global Occupation, page 118 says, what could have been the reasoning behind Freemasonry's creation? Actually, it was the creation of the Jesuits, of the ruthless dictatorial power, and he's going to be speaking of Russia. Right? So it goes, what were the Jesuits aiming? So this is me. What were the Jesuits aiming at creation of communism and the Masonic founding of the USSR? And so the Ka provides the answer. So I'm trying to steer some people to him. So if the role of the United States was to lead us into the New World Order, then Russia's role was no less important, or being no less important, was to apply the pressure that would make it all possible. The same type of thing that we're seeing today is the same type of things that they've planned to do way back in the day. And so there needed to be a good cop, bad cop, thesis, antithesis, synthesis, problem, reaction, solution at play. And so he continues, humanity first had to become convinced that the need of such a governing body, like what? Like a world government? Yeah, that type of body. And so the conditions had to be created whereby the people would accept this as an alternative. So are you going to be willing to give up some of this sovereignty? I mean, at least do it in the name of peace. At least do it in the name of the environment.
I mean, we already heard that when it comes to for the greater good, right? Your sovereignty to decide what you want to inject into your body, and if that's just gonna save one life, it's a small price to pay to give up a little bit of sovereignty for the greater good of the humanity.
Yeah. And so they need to create a phony crisis and a phony war or a phony enemy. The phony enemy was, communism embedded in the USSR, and the phony or engineered crisis was the war itself. And so that's not to say that there wasn't a real war, that the people didn't really die. It's to say that the whole thing was contrived, it was engineered, and so the historical narrative that you were that I was kind of told won't hold up after some scrutiny. And so he continues and says, the world could somehow only be convinced that nations were responsible for war, and that peace could only be achieved if nationalism sovereign nations were eliminated. Then perhaps humanity would finally arrive at a point of accepting a one-world authority. And so, well, what would you need to do to make that happen? It seems like it's difficult to do, he says. In order to lead mankind into this conclusion, however, wars would have to be created, sparked, and fanned into existence by acts of terrorism and military aggression. He continues, page 119. Almost without exception, the USSR was the main perpetrator. The constant strife and fear that a conflict somewhere could escalate into nuclear war has played on people's minds psychologically, wearing them down. Right?
I can't hold my laughter. It's like somebody, it's like you can turn on, I don't know, CNN right now or any other one. I'm just saying CNN because, just funny. But this is what you would hear,
Exactly.
Yeah. Yep. The nuclear threat, Russia is the perpetrator.
Yep.
And then the whole 9 yards.
Yep. So nothing's changed, right? And so what is this, it says consent here, but what does the constant fear playing on people's minds, psychologically breaking them down do? What does this thing do? Well, he continues, he says, it has caused them to desire world peace more than anything else. Now, suppose that some time in the future, a final conflict precipitated, say in Europe or the Middle East, and the superpowers are intentionally drawn into it. What if one of the powers was destroyed as a result, and an additional destruction occurring elsewhere in the world? Humanity would be awestruck and overwhelmed by such destruction. Well, what would happen next? Well, the people would be prepared at that point, the quote goes, to accept a proposed one-world government which promises to prevent such a tragedy from ever occurring again, right? So that was the whole idea behind the Great Depression, right? So we need a Federal Reserve, which again is not federal.
So people have to go hungry. There has to be like this shortage of food. There has to be like people don't have jobs. They're not making money and all that stuff. Then, hey, we'll make sure we'll put a body there that will control, and this will never happen.
Problem, reaction,
solution.
Yeah, same stuff.
So that being said, like you said, people will die, right? It is going to be, it's not going to be pretty.
And so so this is what happens, right? So when people look around and they see real people dying, they automatically, now the narrative gets solidified in their mind. What they were like, so with the outbreak thing, when people thought that was the case, that solidified the narrative in their mind, right?
And once you're emotionally attached to something like that, there's no evidence you can bring it to that person to show that, hey, listen, even though years later, like 2 years later now you have, and well, these numbers are kind of like, we're like anybody that came in was a case of whatever the name is, right? And but even then, we hear people now saying, even though there's no mask mandates, I'm still going to wear it.
Right.
Well, I mean, you can do what you want to do. Nobody's saying something, but clearly there's nothing behind that. Like, if you trust the science, now your science is saying that, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so now the quote continues as we say, like, what would these people kind of do, right? So, well, they would be convinced that nations cause wars, and they would be disillusioned by the needless loss of life resulting in such wars. The people of the world would finally be willing to surrender their national sovereignty to a higher authority, claiming the ability to protect them from one another, right? And so we see a kind of like a nice parallel with what's happening today. Yeah, we'll just continue because I don't want to get into flagging territory. So this was the plan from the beginning, right? So the same guys behind the scenes that start the phony wars are the same guys that are calling for world government. We see that same idea with the outbreak people, right? So the same people that declare it are the same people that say we need to keep doing it, are the same people that are the benefactors of it, and it's the same idea. So
to that point, right? The person that was the champion of we need to do it disappeared all of a sudden, right? It's like, 2-3 months, you can't find him.
Yeah. This is a textbook problem, reaction, solution scenario, right? So for world government, it goes something like this, right? So problem, competition between sovereign nation states creates needless wars. Reaction, let's all get along and work together and get rid of competition. Well, to do that, what do you got to do? Solution, you put a world government in its place where there's no more war by dissolving sovereign nations so that there's no more competition. And so it's the Rodney King, can't we all just get along? And if we can get along, then we can unite. If we can unite in the God, King, Father, Friend sense, this is, the United Nations is the concept of the Tower of Babel in the Old Testament, right? So, and today we see the EU Parliament building that's reconstructed as a half-built Tower of Babel, right? So maybe we'll put that image in the overlay in the post-production. So this idea of this reaction solves the problem, but the solution solves the reaction, right? So these guys are smart. They know what they're doing. And just like that, you have the implementation of a world government authority over all the nations of the world. And so the question is, well, what are we actually seeing today? So same story, different day. Bad Russia invades this other place, provoking NATO and U.S. response. Threats of nuclear war as a deterrent for anyone that's willing to get in the way of the bad Russians. And so we have an artificial supply chain disruption, the purposeful blocking of the different canals that the supply chain depends on. Divic 91, this lockdown restriction business thing that was planned.
Food shortages.
The borrowing of all the money to as Robert Welsh would say, you're siphoning off all this money you're destroying the wealth of that nation.
Yeah, the dollar being under threat right now, like being oil being sold
in a different currency.
Yeah.
This is known as a thievocracy, right? And who's carrying it out? The Plutarchs are carrying it out under oligarchical collectivism, giving all this money to these corporations, of which the citizenry see none, and neither do the citizenry have the ability to hold these guys accountable, right? And so now we have the idea of the trucker convoys, further disrupting the supply chain. And so anytime you see a revolution, as Bezmenov would say, we would look at these things as like, yeah, the convoys are kind of like revolutionary in a sense. But anytime you see these type of things, as Bezmenov would say, like, no revolution is grassroots. These things have to be financed. And no, they're not financed by, citizens donating money here and there, even though those sound like large amounts. They pale in comparison to what the impact is on the economy. And these are good things that these people are doing, and they need to be applauded for doing it, but there's behind the scenes what is going on. So it's further disruption of the supply chain, and this is why you would want to lead something like this: thesis, antithesis, synthesis, right? So at the
end of the day, the supply chain was disrupted, right?
And that's the end goal, right? So because now you're going to use that as another catalyst to do something else that we'll get into. Right? So now this is going to kind of get us into this idea of phase 3, right? So all these engineered crises, where is it all leading? The next phase, of course, is phase 3, the corporate state. And so nation states are already on the out. There's some good quotes about that. So in the Boston Herald in America, it's August 4th, 1976, says, the old framework of international politics with their spheres of influence, their military alliances between nation states, the fiction of sovereignty, doctrinal conflicts arising from 19th century crisis, is clearly no longer compatible with reality. Man, this is in 1976. The nation state is a fundamental union of man's organized life, has ceased to be the principal creative force. International banks and multinational corporations are acting and planning in terms that are far in advance of the political concepts of the nation states. And so, astute people at the time making observations about what's going on. And so you get this idea of like the new era of international banking and finance, manuscript copy, Bank of America, NT and SA, San Francisco, 1970, says, in the coming 25 years, we can expect a shift from influence by the nation state to a new and growing influence by private, profit-motivated entrepreneurial organizations and supranational economic institutions, which together can surmount present structures of limited geography. Well, that's what the nation states have, or limited and often unrealistic political programs of single nation states. They already know that they're on the out. The nation states are looked at as old dinosaurs.
Yeah.
They need to die. They need an extinction level event to get them out of there so that we can go ahead and move in with the corporate.
Exactly, right? So anything else that needs to die with that, with the nation states, they'll tie all that to that, and then they just kill them off everything, right?
Yes.
So whether it's like you said, if it's like the dollar system and then the whole coin and everything, and then something new will come out of that.
The family unit.
All that will tie into that, and then that's it, gone.
Yes.
Meteorite would hit, and then boom, 2 years in, we all forgot.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Yep.
It's gonna be just us sitting good back in my day. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And so now you get Richard J. Babbitt and Ronald Muller. Global Research, page 14 says, for business purposes, the boundaries that separate one nation from another are no more real than the equator. Wow. They are merely convenient demarcations of ethnic, linguistic, and cultural entities. They do not define business requirements or consumer trends. Once management understands and accepts this world economy, its view of the marketplace and its planning necessarily expands. Well, what else do you have to say? Page 15, he notes, the rise of the planetary enterprise is producing an organizational revolution. Oh no, another revolution? As profound in its implications for modern man as the Industrial Revolution and the rise of the nation state itself.
No, he said it. Yeah.
He said it, right?
Yeah.
He continued, this is a gold mine. So he continues, if we compare the annual sales corporations of the gross national product of countries for 1973, we discover that GM, General Motors, is bigger than Switzerland, Pakistan, and South Africa. The Royal Dutch Shell is bigger than Iran, Venezuela, and Turkey, and that Goodyear Tire is bigger than Saudi Arabia. The average growth rate of the most successful global corporations is 2 to 3 times that of the most advanced industrial countries, including the United States. Wow.
Even the big boy United States himself.
Gonzo, right?
Yeah.
So now this next piece, right? So this was before the rise of Amazon, Apple, and Google, right? So you imagine power and reach of the corporation compared to the GDP of these countries, but we can continue. He says, to those who question power, corporate statesmen like to point out that, like the Pope, they have no divisions at their command. The source of their extraordinary power are to be found elsewhere. The power is to transform the world political economy, and in doing so, transform the historic role of the nation state. Oh, so they're going to redefine and redistribute the role of the nation state. And we know that it's going to ultimately end up in the garbage can. But they have to talk nice about it while they're doing it. He says, in the process of developing a new world, look at all the buzzwords. They're all here. The managers of firms like GM, IBM, PepsiCo, GE, Pfizer, Shell, Volkswagen, Exxon, and a few hundred others are making daily business decisions which have more impact than those of most sovereign governments.
There you go. They said it, the silent part out loud.
Yep. And so, on where people live, what they work, where they work, if any, what they will do, what they will eat, what they will drink, where, what sorts of knowledge schools and universities will they encourage.
And like you said, this is before these technological companies that where we willingly give that information, right? Facebook probably knows me better than I do.
Yeah, so that's Yuval Harari. That's what he says. The guy that gave the speech at the the World Economic Forum, right? So. Well, he's in here too.
We'll get to that. When they say you'll own nothing, they literally mean nothing.
Yes,
right?
Yes. It is specifically because they know more about you than you know about yourself.
Exactly.
That's the reason that they give, right? And so, to finish this off, and what kind of society their children will inherit. Now, you remember that list that was given to us, right? So what they need to be able to affect all those bullet points.
Yeah.
And so the children are a very important piece in all this because they're going to be the inheritors of all of this stuff. And so the next piece, he says, the managers of the global corporations are seeking to put into practice a theory of human organization that will profoundly alter the nation-state system around the society has been organized for over 400 years. What they are demanding, in essence, is the right to transcend the nation-state and in the process to transform it. What are they going to transform it into? So what's the next phase? So the next phase is the corporate state, obviously, right? So as we continue the quote, fueled by the explosive expansion of international trade, travel, and communications, the power of the nation state is being diminished drastically, significantly reducing the politician's role as a minor power broker. Wow. However, leaders in international business, finance, and the defense industry, remember the military-industrial complex, not only dominate the superclass, but they also move more freely into high positions in the government of a nation-state, and then back to private life, largely unnoticed by the elected officials.
We talked about Halliburton, the communist version 1, right?
Yeah. So Dick Cheney, the Clintons, all of those guys, right? So, and their Council on Foreign Relations members, and they're members of other groups of the roundtables as well. And so to finish off the quote, it says, which remain abysmally ignorant of the affairs outside their scope. And so do you think this would apply to our current leadership as well? Or?
Oh, yeah, even more. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so, if we continue here, in this way, the corporate state arises like a termite, eating away the power of the nation state from within. And so remember, we define the corporate state as a powerful corporation or groups of corporations that control economic, political, and judicial systems of constitutional republics, monarchies, or democracies. And so how do they control these republics, monarchies, and democracies? Well, they by transcending the natural boundaries of nation states through global business. They can either do this individually or by pooling their resources together, gaining the economic, political, and judicial power within a nation state. And so we said previously that corporations form the basis of the society within a state, that corporations can exist as their own persons and can buy armies, much like the nobles did in the feudalistic times, as well as finance political campaigns in order to control politicians to subvert state policy by favorable laws and regulations. Many worry that a corporatocracy or an oligarchy is replacing or soon will replace a democracy. I think we've kind of covered that.
Yeah. First of all, we wouldn't have democracy, but yeah.
Right.
It will, right? Yeah.
Yes. Right. So we also said when corporations come together, pooling their resources to control the economic, political, and judicial systems within a state, it's called oligarchical collectivism. And so the oligarchs get together collectively to control the economic, political, and judicial systems of the state. So now we get to, John Coleman in his book, One World Order, Socialist Dictatorship. He quotes Richard Gardner in the Council on Foreign Relations, CFR Journal of Foreign Affairs, April 1974 issue. It says, we will build the New World Order piece by piece, right under their noses, meaning the American people. Yeah. The house of the New World Order will have to be built from the bottom up rather than the top down. An end run around sovereignty, eroding it piece by piece, will accomplish much more than the old-fashioned frontal assault. So piece by piece, stealth and secrecy, peace and politics, Fabianistic revolution, but we're dissolving nation states into the corporate state.
It's like if we are successful, and we will be. Yeah.
Yeah. All the quotes kind of come back, right? So in this format kind of helps kind of like seed or at least provide a timeline or something to where those quotes can kind of just naturally make their way up, right? So, how are they going to do this without anybody really knowing it, right? It doesn't seem like this is something that CNN is reporting on, right? So now...
it was on CNN Plus.
That's what it is. They launched it on CNN Plus.
Yeah, they tied it to something that's going to go down, and then it's gone. Yeah.
Yeah, and so now they're going to use the existing infrastructure of the secret societies, or what we should really call the secret social societies, the roundtable organizations. And here it is important to know that you have three types of societies in operation here. So one, you have secret societies. These are the Jesuits, historically Jesuits, Freemasonry, Knights Templar, Rosicrucian, ESMOM, the Sovereign Military Order of Malta. And in these scenarios, you're going to have things that are akin to secret rites and rituals of initiation. This kind of gets us into
the
mixed religion stuff that we'll cover later. You'll have secret signs and symbols, handshakes or gestures. You'll have secret oaths, Masonic oaths, Jesuit oaths. You have mystical or spiritual components to them. Truth is gained by initiation and service. You'll have, you operate behind front organizations, so fronts behind fronts behind fronts. You're sworn to secrecy, and you take these blood oaths. And if you violate those blood oaths, then they have these horrible ways that they say that they would,
heads are gonna roll.
Yeah. And then they have what's known as various rings of power and a pyramidal structure, which is why they use a lot of this symbology. And the symbology comes from the mystery religions, but it's been adopted and kind of modified for other purposes.
Yeah, we covered a little bit in communist subversion, right? Rings within rings within rings.
Yeah.
The idea is, again, with the 0.01% of the 1% control the whole world.
Exactly, right. So that idea is going to go back to Weishaupt, right? So Adam Weishaupt, founder of the Bavarian Illuminati, 1776. So the next piece here is number two is the secret social societies. And the secret social societies would be something like Council on Foreign Relations, the Bilderberg Group, the Club of Rome, Budapest and Madrid, the Committee of 300, the Royal Institute of International Affairs, or Chatham House, the Trilateral Commission, Bohemian Grove. There's a whole list that I think we may show some of them later.
Yep.
And so on this, you're initiated based on a skill set. This is not secret handshakes and things like that. You have connections, you have power, you have influence, you have money. And so what matters here is, state government policy, and you determine the policies of each nation state that you want to influence. And so the third population is us, me and you, ordinary people in a state, nation, or city. And we're the general population: eat, sleep, school, work, repeat, birth, school, work, taxes, debts, retirement, let it repeat, right? So
the American dream.
Right, straight up. So we mentioned, this is kind of like, getting into like some of my favorite stuff here, because, a lot of the details start to pop out at this particular point. So, in Communist Subversion 1, we mentioned Cecil Rhodes with his diamond and gold fortune determined that, I'm going to use this fortune in my 7 wills to set up this scholarship program to formulate a secret society to expand the British Empire. As Carroll Quigley would note in his book, The Anglo-American Establishment, page 2, it says, the Rhodes Scholarship was established by the terms of Cecil Rhodes' 7th will, are known to everyone. What's not so widely known is that Rhodes, in 5 previous wills, left his fortune to form a secret society, which was to devote itself to the preservation and expansion of the British Empire. Oh, that's nice, Rose. Thanks for doing that. Later on, the direction changes from a world empire based on Britain, or British Empire, to the New World Order as it's known today, based in Manhattan, with the United Nations as the front organization under control of what's known as the Rockefeller Consortium. And so if there's ever these questions like, when these guys die off, who's the predominant guy that takes over and takes this thing to, if it's kind of like Inglourious Bastards, where, he approaches the guy like, your empire skills are a bit amateur.
Yeah, we're here to see if you want to go pro, yeah.
And so they go pro under the Rockefeller Consortium, right? So, and so in the book, Anglo-American Establishment, Carroll quickly says on page 2, he goes, and what does not seem to be known to anyone is that the secret society was created by Rhodes and his principal trustee, Lord Milner, and he continues to exist today. And to be sure, this secret society is not a childish thing like the Ku Klux Klan, and does not have any secret robes or secret hand clasps or secret passwords. It does not have a need for these things because the members all know each other intimately. And so you go, okay, we're kind of getting into some good detail here. So what was the name of this alleged secret society Carroll Quigley talks about? So he goes, this secret society, or this society, has been known at various times as Milner's Kindergarten, as the Roundtable Group, as the Rhodes Crowd, as the Times Crowd, and the All Souls Group, and as the Cliveden Set. So the Cliveden Set, that's from the Astor County House where they used to stay. All of these terms are unsatisfactory for one reason or another, according to Carroll Quigley. And so, what did Quigley end up calling the group? But they have all these different names. What did he settle on? He goes, and I have chosen to call it the Milner Group, right? Those persons who have used other terms or heard them used have not generally been aware that all of these various terms refer to the same group. And so he goes on to say that page 4, he goes, all these terms were more or less inadequate Well, why are they inadequate? Well, because they focused attention on only a part of the society or only part of all of its activities. And so, well, in this group, who was the leader? And so in the Anglo-American Establishment, it says Carroll Quigley, page 4, the leader was Cecil Rhodes, fabulously wealthy empire builder and the most important person in South Africa. The second was William T. Stead, the most famous and probably almost the most sensational journalist of the day. The third was Reginald Balliol Brett, later known as Lord Esher, friend and confidant of Queen Victoria and later the most influential advisor to the King Edward and King George. Now that we have the key figures, what was the actual plan? If we continue, it says the plan of the organization provided an inner circle to be known as the Society of the Elect, and the outer circle to be known as the Association of Helpers. Within the Society of the Elect, the real power is to be exercised by the leader and a junta of 3. The leader was to be Rhodes, and the junta was to be Stead, Brett, and Alfred Milner. And so you ask the question, what is this junta thing that you're referring to? A junta is a military or political group that rules a country after taking power by force. And so it kind of gives us an idea of the mindset where we're going to do this by force. And so, well, as we go through here, who were the junta of 3 that Rhodes spoke about? Well, the junta of 3 were represented by William Stead, Britain's most famous journalist, Lord Esher, confidant to Queen Victoria, and later the most influential advisor to King Edward and King George, and Alfred Milner, a colonial administrator who, although he was relatively unknown to the outside world, became the group's leader after Rhodes' death in 1902. How long has this guy been thinking about this idea and before he can finally put it into fruition? And so, according to Carroll Quigley on page 4, he says, as we shall see, Rhodes had been planning for this event for more than 17 years.
That's a long time.
So we're going to find out later that, Rhodes isn't alone in giving birth to these ideas. Yes, he has these guys that are actually going to put boots to ground to get it done, but ideas are being shared in the background with other groups that he's a part of. A part of it is Freemasonry. And so we're going to see that, this was going to be the birth of something that was going to be like the business layer aspect of the New World Order that can be used to end the nation states.
Set up the corporate state that will take over the nation state. Yeah.
Exactly. There you go. All right. So, how was this group identified over the years? Well, let's keep going. Page 5. This is Quigley. During this period of almost 60 years, the society has been called by various names. During the first decade or so, it was called the Secret Society of Cecil Rhodes, or the Dream of Cecil Rhodes. Okay, after the decade is over, what do they call it? In the second and third decades of its existence, it was known as Milner's Kindergarten, 1901 to 1910. After this second decade, the Roundtable Group, 1910 to 1920, what were they called after the 1920s? Well, since 1920 they had been called by various names depending on which phase of the activities was being examined. It has been called the Times Crowd, the Rhodes Crowd, the Chatham House Crowd, the All Souls Group, and the Cliveden Set. And so, all right, what was the history of this group? Well, Quigley notes on page 6, the history can be divided into 4 periods. The first period was the preparation phase. The second period was the Rhodes phase. The third period was the New College phase. The fourth period was the Souls phase, referring to All Souls College. And so, what were the 4 phases? So, the first period is the preparation period, and that's 1873 to 1891. It could be called the preparatory period, centering around William Stead and Alfred Milner. Okay, the second phase was the Rhodes period. So, was he prominent then? Well, the second period from 1891 to 1901 could be called the Rhodes period, although Stead was the chief figure for most of it. Okay, the third...
So, about 10 years, right?
Yeah. And so the third period, the New College phase, the third period from 1901 to 1922 could be called the New College period and centers around Alfred Milner still. And so, the fourth period, the Souls period, the fourth period from about 1922 to the present could be called the All Souls period and centers around Lord Lothian, Lord Brand, and Lionel Curtis. These are important names because of the organizations that they later found, and they're going to have a hand in what we currently today know as the Roundtable Group. So So we have to ask the question, well, what happened during these phases? Well, during these periods, the group grew steadily in power and influence until about 1939. What were their accomplishments? That seems like a long period. What were these guys doing? Well, this is the most surprising when we learn that one of the chief methods by which this group works has been through propaganda. And this is an important piece, right? So, it plotted the Jameson Raid of 1895. It caused the Boer War of 1899 and 1902. It set up the controls of the Rhodes Trust. That's a very important piece for passing down legacy stuff that they're doing today. It created the Union of South Africa 1906 to 1910. It established the South African periodical, The State, in 1908. It founded the British Empire periodical, The Roundtable, in 1910, and this remains the mouthpiece of the group. It has been the most powerful single influence in All Souls, Balliol, and New College at Oxford for more than a generation. And he lists this long list, things that we're going to kind of care about later is going to be the founding of the Royal Institute of International Affairs in 1919, and a couple of these pieces that are going to pop back up later. So controls and still controls to the very considerable extent the sources and the writings of the history of British imperial and foreign policy since the Boer War. If we go back here, that's 1899 to 1902. And so, let's continue because there's more interesting things than those. Now the next question is, how was the group structured after Cecil Rhodes? And this starts to get to the goodies. Page 7, 3 groups within the groups. So here we're rings within rings within rings. That was the idea that goes back to Weishaupt, 1776, founder of the Bavarian Illuminati. And so these 3 groups were the Toynbee Group, the Cecil Bloc, and the Rhodes Secret Society. And so what marked each group? Well, the Toynbee Group was a group of political intellectuals formed at Balliol about 1873 and dominated by Arnold Toynbee and Milner himself. Then you had the Cecil Bloc. The Cecil Bloc was a nexus of political and social power formulated by Lord Salisbury and extending from the great sphere of politics into the fields of education and publicity. Okay, so now we're bringing our intellectuals into the scope. Then you have the Rhodes Society. So the Rhodes Secret Society was a group of imperial federalists formed in the period of 1889 using the economic resources of South Africa to extend and perpetuate the British Empire. And so in Communist Subversion 1 and 2, we didn't mention this New York Times article, which we can mention here, that talked about the Rhodes-Milner Roundtable Secret Society entitled, Mr. Rhodes, Ideal for Anglo-American Greatness. He believed that a wealthy secret society should work to secure the world's peace in British American Federation. And so we asked, as we go through the quote here, it says, what do the articles say? Well, perhaps it can be best summarized as an argument in favor of the organization of a secret society on the lines of the Jesuit order for the promotion of peace and welfare of the world and the establishment of American-British Federation with absolute home rule component parts. The article states, Mr. Rhodes began by declaring that the key to this idea for the development of the English-speaking race was the foundation of a society copied as an organization from the Jesuits, combined with a differential rate and a copy of the United States Constitution, wrote Mr. Rhodes, should be home rule for the Federation, or of the Federation.
So we see now key players coming to the timeline, or at least being mentioned now, right? Yeah.
Right.
Not that they weren't in part of the timeline. Now they're being mentioned, and kind of they're
coming out of the shadows.
Yeah, the bigger plan is kind of being revealed slowly.
Right. So if we continue further down, it says, but towards securing this millennium, Mr. Rhodes believed that the most powerful factor would be a secret society organized like Loyola's. But how would you financially support something so large, so powerful, and so clandestine or secret? He continues and provides the answer. He says, it would be supported by the accumulated wealth of those whose aspiration is the desire to do something. Oh, other guys like him? You mean other oligarchical collectivists? Yeah, those type of guys. Those are his cup of tea. And so there's the corporate state based on oligarchical collectivism coming to power. Even further, he tells how they're going to carry it out. He says, the only feasible way to carry out this idea is a secret society. And what must this secret society do, Mr. Rhodes? Please tell us. He goes, gradually absorbing the wealth of the world to be devoted to such an object. Okay, so now we're starting to see this progress.
Towards the corporate state, right?
There you go.
Slowly we'll own the whole world, pretty much.
There you go. So if you remember, Cecil Rhodes at the time was one of the wealthiest men of all human history, and we included him in Communist Subversion 1 and Communist Subversion 2. But as you may know, that's the tip of the iceberg, right? Remember, what Carroll Quigley says at Cecil Rhodes' Secret Society says the system that he wants to set up is to be controlled in feudalist fashion. You want to go back to what the monarchies, when they were destroyed, that was feudalism. You want to go back to that?
Go back to the old
structure.
World, the structure.
There you go. Right.
He wants to make the decisions, or at least whoever is going to be in power of the system that he's building.
Right. Yeah. So he himself is a cog in this machine going forward. And so remember, in feudalism, you have kings, queens, you have emperors, monarchs, the nobility, vassals, professional soldiers, and they do the bidding of the king. Who's going to play this kingly role? And so we get this quote: by the central banks of the world, acting in concert by secret agreements, arrived at frequent and private meetings and conferences. Well, who has secret, frequent and private meetings and conferences today? Well, let's continue. The Council on Foreign Relations, the Bilderberg Group, the Trilateral Commission, and in turn, they're all interwoven to a dense global network of financial institutions such as the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund, the World Trade Organizations, the Bank of International Settlements, while the military and political institutions such as NATO, the European Union, the United Nations, and think tanks that are the Atlantic Council, the RAND Corporation, the Brookings Institute, the Fabian Society, and secret societies and conference groups are Lay Circle, the Club of Rome, the Bohemian Grove, and tax-exempt foundations like the Rockefeller and Ford Foundation, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and who range in people in government, media, multinational corporations, and other positions of power within a society. And okay, so what was to be at that time? What was to be the apex of the system? We just have to keep reading. The apex of the system was to be the Bank of International Settlements in Bâle, Switzerland, which was a private bank owned and controlled by the central banks of the world, which were themselves private corporations. Each central bank in hands like, and Quigley names the names, Sir Montague Norman of the Bank of England. It was Benjamin Strong at the New York Federal Reserve Bank. It was Charles Rist of the Bank of France. It is Jean Marchak of the Reichsbank. These sought to dominate the government by their ability to, and he gives a bulletized list, control treasury loans, manipulate foreign exchanges, influence economic activity in a country, and influence cooperative politicians by subsequent economic rewards in the business world or private sector. And so the central banks created in the United States, this is a quote from Frank Adelot, he goes, in his book, American Rhodes Scholarship, says, in 1888, Rhodes made his third will. And so leaving everything to Lord Rothschild, his financier in mining enterprises, with an accompanying letter enclosing the written matter discussed between us. The model of this proposed secret society was the Society of Jesus, though he mentions also the Masons. The secret society was organized on the conspiratorial pattern of circles within circles. And we mentioned before, this is the rings within rings of power. And so he continues, Professor Quigley informs us, so he's read Quigley, that a central part of the secret society was established by March of 1891 using Rhodes money. The organization was run for Rothschild by Lord Alfred Milner. The roundtable worked behind the scenes at the highest level of the British government, influencing foreign policy and England's involvement in conduct in World War I. And so I think that's enough for this particular podcast. Yeah. What we can do is
this one was like data heavy, right?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I kind of get carried away with all the good data.
Yeah, this is Jeremy's favorite topic. So
so much good information that kind of gives you the inner workings of the roundtable organizations, and there's so much history there that's kind of off the table. It's the whole flashlight thing again. Right? So flashlight close to the ground, small circuit goes up higher. There's a bigger circle, more exposure to better data, at least on this subject, because these guys are laying the groundwork for the business layer of the New World Order. That we want to kind of like help people compartmentalize in their mind when they think about the subject.
Yeah.
So there's the business layer, there's the mystery religion layer, and then you lay that stuff down on the timeline. You can see a gradual progression, where they're at, where they're going, and kind of become predictive at some point.
Yeah, this would become like a good reference video, right? Because a lot of the times, we'll come back to this. Like, hey, we talked about it. It would be hard to do this one in a slow pace because this is kind of where everything starts, and then there's a lot of things happening at the same time, right?
Right. Yeah.
Like you said, when from one revolution to another, and then setting up the foundation for. To be able to take over the nation states, right?
Yeah. So to dissolve the sovereignty and the wealth of the nation states into the corporate state.
Yeah. It is a lot. So there's they had to do a lot. So there's
My
no
bad,
So if this was a little bit fast, again going with the comments and all that stuff, saying that things go a little bit fast, but again this is our excitement of like holding on, sitting on all this data, and then kind of everything is coming out like fast too. Once everything is out there and we can refer back to this, we can slow it down, come back to some of these topics again, take it one by one, and go from there.
Yeah. So wrap it up. So
I think we can do that.
Yeah. So stay up to date with everything iconic by following us on all of our social media. Again, we've placed a list in the beginning of the podcast. We have if you notice, we're not in the hoodies today. We're in our Cyvilan t-shirts. T-shirts are now available for all 3 podcasts. You can support us on Patreon if you like what you're doing. Like, share, subscribe.
Patreon.com/The Iconic Podcast.
Yep.
And all the other links to other social media and everything too, you can find in the description.
Yes, sir.
Yep.
And so with that, thanks for watching. Again, be patient with us. We're learning and growing as we go. So
yeah, let us know which format you like better. In this one, we try to show a little bit more of the notes and everything too. Yeah. If you like that, if you don't like, if prefer more conversational,
Yeah, we can do both, but I think people. My assumption was that they would kind of like to see something, right? So for mentioning all this stuff, where's it found?
Exactly. Yeah. So then it would be kind of in between the communist subversion type documentaries where we have to show, we kind of show stuff, and then here where we talk like as we read, and then
side note and say
exactly, and then so you can use it as a reference point too, because you have like books, pages, and all that stuff too, so it's easier to follow.
Yep, and maybe we'll put a list of all that stuff out where they can find all the sources. We've already recommended, Tragedy and Hope and the Anglo-American Establishment. There's some new ones in here that we mentioned. There's going to be a whole lot more coming up. Right? So, I mean, it's good, and I think we'll put links for where they can get it on like Amazon or whatever.
Yeah, and then again, so the idea for God, King, Father, Friend, and Cyvilan is to be like focused and data heavy, and then the Iconic Podcast would be a little bit more slow. That
chill.
Was like
we're just hanging out.
Yeah, that was that's how we imagined in our minds, But because I think these ones are coming out first, they seem a little bit too fast or too slow. We'll figure it out.
Fire,
exactly. Once
we'll harmonize.
We'll find a rhythm as we go too. Yeah, and then we'll. Optimize, right?
There you go. Yeah.
That being said, thanks again for watching.
Again for joining.
We'll see you next time.